There is a second factor that is causing a tremendous amount of stress for people right now and surprisingly impacting the 20-somethings. And I'd love to hear you share about this second topic of loneliness.
Loneliness is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about.
How come?
I just find it fascinating. Just like stress and burnout, I love discussing these topics because I like to demystify things that people feel like it's only happening to me. See, I have this unique vantage point, right? Because I've been a clinician and seeing patients. And then I've also been giving talks. So I see that perspective of what people tell me when the door closes. And I wish more people knew. So let me share the data with you. Loneliness is a global epidemic. Data shows that globally, 330 million people go 2 weeks without speaking to a friend or a family member.
2 weeks?
2 weeks. The Surgeon General, who, by the way, Vivek Murthy is my friend from college, and now he is the Surgeon General. Look at that, right? The Surgeon General has said that loneliness is an urgent public health crisis. He wrote a book about it. When you look at the statistics for loneliness, it is so eye-opening. In the US, 50% of adults experience loneliness. Amongst Gen Z, that number is even higher. So from 18 to 25, that number is even higher, 78%.
78% of kids in their 20s are struggling with loneliness?
Yes.
And here's one thing I want to say. I know that there's a big light at the end of the tunnel about what we're going to do about this. So as you're listening, I don't want you to get like super depressed. Like part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about these 4 topics is because people are struggling on their own with this. And when you think that you're struggling on your own, you beat yourself up and it makes it worse. And there are very simple things you can do to understand the topic and to do something about it. That the power truly is in your hands if you understand that this is something very common and you're not alone in struggling with it. Can you explain the difference between loneliness versus spending time alone? What is loneliness?
I love that. I will also say, Mel, that when you're talking about something like loneliness, the first step, like we talked about earlier, right? Normalize and validate. So when you share data, it is meant to shock in terms of like, wow, I can't believe that this is what's happening. Maybe I'm not alone then. And so the data, yes, it is jarring and striking, but it should hopefully, if you're listening, make you feel like, wow, 50% of adults, 78% of Gen Z. In the latest report by the Surgeon General on parental stress and mental health, 65% of parents feel lonely and 77% of single parents experience loneliness. So it's everywhere. The difference, I love your question. What is the difference between feeling alone and being lonely? Alone is a physical state. So you can be alone and feel fine. Loneliness is an emotional experience. So when you think of yourself like Sawyer just traveled alone through Asia. I have also, in my single days, traveled alone. Didn't feel lonely. It's a physical state of being. You're alone. Feeling lonely is an emotional experience, and you can be lonely in a crowd of people. So it's less about interfacing, who's around you and rather what's happening internally.
Got it. Okay. There's also research that you wanted to share about how damaging this is to your health.
The fascinating thing about loneliness, and this is why I was saying I love talking about it, is because when you think about loneliness, most people, you'll say it's a mental health thing, right? We know that it increases your risk of anxiety or depression, insomnia, but loneliness doesn't just have mental health manifestations. It also has physical health manifestations. In one study, the risk of death of loneliness was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wait, so if you're feeling lonely, which means you're emotionally disconnected from other people, it has the same health risk as smoking 15 cigarettes a day?
Yes, it increases your risk of heart disease by 30% and your risk of stroke by 30%. it can shorten your lifespan, particularly if you feel a sense of loneliness in older age. So loneliness is not something that's just about mental health. It has physical health ramifications.
I think this is a really important topic because I have gone through major periods in my life where I realized that I was extremely lonely. And what felt really bizarre about it is that I was surrounded by people. So when I was traveling a lot from work, I was on planes with people all the time. I would go to events and there would be 1,000 people in the audience and people backstage, and I'd be talking to people, but I constantly had this just nagging sense of not being alone, but being lonely.
It's this it's a feeling that like gnaws at you.
Yes. And there are even stages in my marriage where I think about kind of Chris and I in our corners, and we're deep in caring for young kids, and, his business is struggling, or we're just not communicating well. Life has become all about the logistics, that we're not really connected, that we've both felt really lonely in our marriage. And I'm thinking about our son who's starting college and the experience of not finding your people yet. And you're around all these people, but you don't really know anybody and you feel lonely. So recognizing that this is super common is the first step. But what is your recommendation in terms of what you do about it? Because I think part of the process about feeling lonely is that, I don't know about how you feel as you're listening, but if I'm in a room and I feel lonely or like I don't have anybody to talk to, the fact that other people are around makes me feel worse, because it seems like everybody else has a friend or everybody else doesn't have a problem with this. And then that makes me kind of withdraw more, which means now I'm even more isolated.
The research points to a really interesting discovery about loneliness and finding your way out of loneliness. So whether you're a parent who has, I'm a parent, and I very much understand having low bandwidth, not enough time, energy, and then it's difficult to form relationships when you don't have much to give, right?
Yep.
Very much something that many parents can relate to. Or if you're in a Gen Z and you're studying, no one has enough time. And so what can you do? You can lean into the science of casual conversation. In one study, one of my favorite studies, a group of people were given 2 clickers. One clicker, it was a study that lasted 6 days. One clicker was for every interaction you had with a close contact. In the study, they called this strong ties. So family member, dear friend, someone you're really connected to. When you think about loneliness, when you say, what is the antidote to loneliness? It's community. Mm-hmm. So you think, I'm going to just lean into community, or rather, that's the advice that you're given. Spend more time with friends and family. But your story, and I've had very similar experiences, sometimes you just don't have that bandwidth to give. And so this study, one clicker was for strong ties. The other clicker was for something called weak ties, casual conversations for parents, for example, at the playground, your barista, when you're dry cleaning, when you're bagging your groceries at the grocery store, just people that you meet along the way. Former science may have said, these sorts of interactions aren't very important for loneliness. You need deep, meaningful conversations. But this study, and another I'll share in a second, really turned this notion on its head, because the study found that people who had lots of the clicker going off with weak ties, so casual conversations throughout the day, had a decreased sense of loneliness, a greater sense of happiness and well-being. So the researchers concluded that it's not about these strong ties. Of course, it's important to have deep, meaningful, connected relationships. But equally so, you want to have these engagements with weak ties, casual conversations that don't require a lot of bandwidth. And so that's good news for someone who's feeling lonely or withdrawn and doesn't have a lot to give when they're running on fumes. When you're at the grocery store, Have a short, brief conversation with someone in the aisle, or when you're bagging your groceries, you're picking up your dry cleaning, have a chat with someone there. It can be very perfunctory and terse, but it will increase your sense of community because you will feel engaged in your surroundings. Another study did something similar, looked across 8 countries. It was a study done by the Harvard Business Review. And it found similar things, that when there's a mix of social interactions with strong ties and weak ties, so of course, conversations with weak ties, it increases your sense of well-being, happiness, and connection. And so really, you're getting at connection through the back door in this situation. Because when you hear about loneliness, you know the antidote is connection, community, fostering these things. But when you are experiencing that sense of loneliness that you and I have talked about, that gnawing sensation, you feel isolated, you feel alone. And also, I just want to mention the paradox of stress. When you are feeling a sense of stress, you feel isolated. And yet you look around and everyone is feeling that too, based on the data, right? 21 people in a room of 30 are experiencing these things, and yet they feel alone in their experience. So we are experiencing all of these things, but we don't talk about it for lots of reasons. Blaming ourselves, we feel a sense of shame and guilt. And so conversation is really the antidote.
We don't talk about it because you feel like a loser when you're lonely. Because the perception is, where did all my friends go? And why does everybody's life look like a big party? And I literally am not connecting with anybody. And I will share a quick story because, again, I think one of the things that I am really passionate about is highlighting why something matters. Because oftentimes on the surface, the solution to a problem that you're facing, and let's be honest with each other, loneliness is a huge problem. You deserve to have amazing friends. I remind myself all the time that some of the most favorite people that I will meet in my life, I have not even met yet. And that sense of hopefulness that there are extraordinary people on the road ahead, that makes me shake loose from that emotional straitjacket that can take hold. And I remember, and I want to share this because I think it's really important, when we moved. So I lived in Boston, or outside of Boston, with my husband and our 3 kids for 26 years. Sense of community, you know where you are. And then we moved to Southern Vermont, like so many people did over the past 4 years, relocated to different areas as hybrid work picked up. I woke up in a brand new place that I was, by the way, excited to be in, and was like, what have I done? I didn't see my friends back in Boston. Now I'm in this whole new community. And I sat in my house for months. I was that statistic of I didn't talk to people for 2 weeks at a time. And I just fed into this, I'm never going to meet people. I'm so lonely. How am I going to break in when everybody's got their friend groups? And I will tell you firsthand, which is why I'm so passionate about this research. Do you want to know how I finally made friends, Dr. Aditi?
Please, I would love to.
I got my rear end out of the frickin' house. I think I was struggling with loneliness and the horizonlessness at the same time. It was like all crashing down. I forced myself to go to this coffee shop that I loved. Now, mind you, I had been going there, but I didn't talk to anybody. I would get my coffee and then I'd sit in the corner and I would feel sorry for myself and I'd read my book and then I'd go home and I'd cry to Chris and I have no friends and I'm really lonely and why do we move? And then finally, I just started to turn to the people next to me. Hi, it's awkward. Do you guys live here? And you start casual conversation, exactly what you're talking about. And what ends up happening is this. When you feel lonely, you don't feel connected to anybody. When you start to say hello to the people that you bump into in your day-to-day life, you are building a crazy scaffolding of familiar faces. You don't need to know their life stories. Simply saying hello to people made me feel like I was part of a community. And one awkward hello at a time, it took me about 6 months. And that's why I like to say, how long does this take? How long do I need to keep doing this? For me, one hello at a time to bump into some of the most favorite people that I've ever met in this teeny little town that I now live in. And so it's the same advice I give to my son who's now in college. You have to get out of your dorm room and stop watching your old life. And you have to start saying hello to strangers and the person who is emptying the waste paper baskets, because the more familiar faces that you have, the more you feel connected and the more you come out of your shell. And I think sitting around expecting this to somehow solve itself is the worst thing that you can do.
Loneliness is a global epidemic. Data shows that globally, 330 million people go 2 weeks without speaking to a friend or a family member.
2 weeks?
2 weeks. The risk of death of loneliness was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wait,